Are we good to go? Are we good to go? Just let them know. Are we live on YouTube and Zoom?
Yes,
okay,
you
hi,
are.
Brilliant. If you can, if anyone on the Zoom can mute themselves now, that would be appreciated. So hi everyone, and welcome to this session, Unlocking Private Capital to Finance Sustainable Infrastructure, Investing for Social and Private Environmental Impact. Thank you for coming, and for those watching virtually on YouTube and Zoom, and of course here at COP26 as well. If the speakers could please talk directly into the mic as close as possible, and share your presentations on Zoom once you come up in turn. A growing group of private sector organizations around the world are seeking to make investments that generate social and environmental value, as well as financial return. This emerging industry of impact investing has the potential to become a potent force for addressing global challenges. This event will explore how impact investing has emerged and how it might evolve, including profiles of a wide range of impacts. Our speakers today are Paulo Matos, CEO of IG4 Capital and Chairman of IGWA, Jim Hall, Professor of Climate and Environmental Risk at Oxford University and prize winner of the Prince Sultan bin Abdulaziz International Prize for Water, Samantha Pineda, CEO of Pineda and Cran Lawyers, João Paulo Ribeira Santana, Executive Director of APPA, and Vivian McKnight, Climate Change Manager at Vail, South Africa. So if we can start and first hear from Paulo of IG4 Capital. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for the invitation. Well, just a brief introduction about IG4 and IGWA. Basically, IG4, it is a private equity firm with offices in London, in Madrid, in São Paulo, in Brazil, in Peru, Lima, Peru, and Santiago in Chile. We cover mainly Latin America, and we've been basically deploying capital with a different, I would say, type of strategy. We started 5.5 years ago, basically to use ESG metrics to turn around companies. So instead of basically using ESG as a way of filtering or sourcing the best companies to invest in, we try to transform companies. So basically, we invest in companies that are not good at start from a ESG point of view, but we believe that in emerging markets, especially, that is the case, and mainly when we talk about private equity. So when we talk about public equities, I think big corporations. They are much more on the spotlight and basically a lot of access already to tools and mechanisms to improve in terms of ESG standards. But when you talk about private equity, especially mid-sized companies, the challenges are much higher. And that's what we did in one of our first investments that today has 4 years. That is Igua Saneamento. Igua is one of the third largest private water and sanitation company in Brazil. We acquired the company in July 2017. And the company, when we acquired, the company was a company that had, excuse me, I think it's not moving here. Yep. Yep. Sorry. Thank you very much. So the company, when we acquired, had a different name, CAB, and the company was in a completely distressed situation. So basically, it's the type of company that no one would buy if you use a ESG standard. But what do we do when we come across this type of companies? Do we just discard them and do not transform them? I would say that in emerging markets, when we talk about mid-sized companies, probably most of them won't have good quality in terms of ESG standards. So what we've been trying to do, and we did in the case of Igua, is to take a company that was pretty important with important footprint in Brazil, and now we increase this footprint with the recent acquisition of Rio de Janeiro Block 2 concession. So it's an important new concession that we added to the portfolio, and in total, a company that has 19 concessions across 40 municipalities and 5 states, and we've been basically serving directly 1.2 million in Rio de Janeiro, billion people in Rio, but in total we have also another almost 7 million Brazilian inhabitants served. So we're talking about a company with almost 9 million inhabitants served in these municipalities. So when we thought about transforming the company, basically instead of just doing more of the same, we've started to work with engineering companies that could bring technology to the redesigning of engineering processes. So an example, and I think that is very interesting in terms of how impactful the change in the use of materials or the change in the use of engineering process can be. The company was using at first basically concrete to build up big wastewater treatment facilities made of concrete. That is usually the dream of a construction company. But that is inefficient in terms of capex. So if you reduce the use of concrete, you could also consume less capital in the process of building new wastewater facilities. It is also something that creates a lot of delays in terms of the achievement of the coverage of wastewater treatment facilities and also the sewage systems. So usually a concrete pool to treat wastewater takes 2 years to be built. That is because you have to build very important and big infrastructures. And it's something that is completely inefficiently when we talk about energy consumption. Why? Because beyond the fact that concrete is super harmful in terms of as a material to be produced to the environment, it's something that basically demands a lot of consumption of energy in the OPEX line, operational cost line, given the fact that 1/3 of the OPEX of a water and sanitation company is energy consumption. So you have to pump water and wastewater in the system, to pump wastewater and water in a system of, 50,000 square meters of size is one thing. To pump water and wastewater in something smaller, more efficient, it will represent less energy consumption. So what we did, for instance, was beyond changing governance, beyond changing the capital structure of the company, with ESG as a priority, that is what I like to call ESG in action. So ESG as a tool of transformation. Basically, we reduced water losses. We came from 66% of water losses. That is what we found in this company when we started. 66 is huge. We reduced with technology from 66 and management to now less than 40%, and we are going down and with the target to achieve the OECD standards. We brought the end users to the company, to be closer to the company, creating ways of communications to the end users to understand their needs and their problems, and also using them to also call attention for problems that we're having from a capillarity point of view in the systems that we were operating. We started to use also information technology, IT, to, instead of using traditional meters, we started to use smart meters and bring technology, digitalizing the infrastructure to understand leakages and also water theft in a better way. We, with engineering, started to use, instead of concrete, we started to use carbon and carbon iron type of modular facilities, in which instead of taking 2 years to build up a wastewater treatment facility, we started to take 8 months. So in terms of coverage to the end user, much faster. So we came from 30% of sewage coverage to more than 60% after 4 years of investments. And by using technology, digitalizing the network and bringing the end user closer, we could understand the problems in terms of water losses quicker. So that in total made the company today, in the last GRASP assessment, that today for ESG in real assets and infrastructure is one of the main institutions, global institutions that basically monitor and make assessments, creating a pattern in terms of ESG assessment. IGUA in 4 years became a company that is ranked today above the average of the North America and Europe in terms of water companies. So we are above the average in terms of ESG in 4 years. We came from a very low bar to something that today it's doing well. Obviously, that we have to continue to improve it. In terms of some data for the way that we see the company in terms of approach, it's not about only creating something that will improve the ESG standards. It's improving the ESG standards by implementing a turnaround strategy in which ESG is part of the value creation. So it's ESG embedded in the KPIs of the company to basically be able to generate value. So it's not ESG only in terms of creating, obviously, a very important impact in terms of environmental, social, and governance, but ESG as a driver for value creation. And we did it in a very interesting way. So here, basically, in terms of the way that the company is structured today, the company is signatory of the UN Global Compact. The company has committed internationally with the zero carbon and 1.5 Celsius Paris Agreement commitment. In terms of the program that we created to embed this new culture in the company, is not about only something that comes from the shareholder, top down, but it has to be bottom up as well. And we've been doing that by basically integrating in the different levels and municipalities that we operate the not only the end users, but the employees in the governance of the company, with committees, local committees, the general committee of ESG, in the level of the holding co and the board. In terms of the results, when we talk about E, S, and G, basically, as I already mentioned, the company improved in all the variables. And we are now with a target, with the commitment to the UN Global Compact targets for water and sanitation. We are committed to do more, especially now when we have the new concession of Rio de Janeiro. I think Rio de Janeiro, it's in Brazil, obviously a postcard of Brazil, but it's one of the states in which, and the municipality of Rio, in which we have one of the worst, let's say, cases in terms of water losses and sewage, especially sewage collection and treatment. So we believe that with the good, basically, track record that we acquired in the last 4 years by being the first company that issued a sustainable debenture in the Brazilian debt market, the company that started to basically create a very good standards. I think we are we have set now a new bar, and it's not a new bar for ourselves, but it's, I think, a new bar to the sector in Brazil. Brazil, in terms of water and sanitation, fortunately, it is one of the worst countries in the globe in terms of water and sanitation. We have water treated, around 92% of the water in Brazil is treated. Not the best quality of water, still a lot to be done in terms of quality. In terms of sewage, just 50% of the sewage is collected and just 34% of the sewage is treated. So it's a big problem, not only in terms of the impacts on the environment, but the impacts in terms of public health. And that's what we are committed to. So I think ESG is not philanthropy. ESG is to use metrics to improve companies and businesses, as I said, to create value and replicate the model in a way that can be something that other companies will pursue, given that I think our case became a very interesting flagship case in Brazil, and to some extent to be used also in other emerging markets. We also do philanthropy, but philanthropy is more about focusing on segments in terms of water. In our case here, IGUA Institute, that is our philanthropic institution, where we don't have actually capacity of the end users to pay for the tariffs, for the bills. So we've been doing two things. One, cross subsidies using social tariff to in the areas of Brazil in which basically end users cannot pay for the bill. So you use cross subsidies, basically charging more from the end users that consume water, and that will subsidize social tariff for those that cannot pay or don't have much to pay. And beyond that, we've been creating alliances with other companies to provide solutions with technology and usually very simple but efficient waste water treatment facilities in areas in which we have poor people living, or people that is living in areas more remote, like, for instance, the Amazon. We have an important program in the Amazon where we've been providing sewage treatment facilities to people that live by the Amazon River. But that had a lot of problems in terms. It's a kind of a paradox. You live by a big river, but you have problems of sanitation that with technology and very focused solutions, you can fix it. So that's what we've been doing. And I think with time, we'll do more and replicate the model throughout other countries that we'll be investing, especially in Latin America. So here already basically talk a little about the numbers and facts, but I think in a nutshell, that is basically what IGUA is today. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Paula. I think that was a nice introduction to the importance of strong ESG targets. Can we now hear from Jim Hall from the University of Oxford? Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm here representing the Prince Sultan bin Abdulaziz International Prize for Water, which is appropriate given we've just heard about water. Though actually what I'm going to talk about is broader in that I will look across infrastructure sectors, so across transport, energy, and water, and to some extent the interdependencies between them, and look at the risks of climate change to those infrastructures, how those risks are becoming increasingly relevant from an investment perspective because of the movement towards financial disclosure of physical climate risks, and so how analysis is developing in order to provide investors with information about those physical climate risks in order to incentivize resilience, to ensure that investments in infrastructure in the future are resilient to the impacts of climate change, as well as incentivizing financial investments in adaptation, which is so greatly needed. And those of you who've been in the adaptation themes of this COP26 will know the numbers in terms of the scale of adaptation deficit. So the extent to which there needs to be much increased investment in adaptation. These numbers come from the UN Environment Programme. Currently a need of $70 billion in developing countries, expected to increase to the hundreds of billions of dollars in adaptation investment required in the coming years, given the climatic extremes that we're facing. And this is the scale of adaptation investment which is reported at the moment. Some of it is coming from official development assistance, ODA. Part of adaptation finance is being reported to the UNFCCC. This is not the whole picture, but it certainly gives the sense that the scale of investment is far less than what is recognized as being needed. The investment is going up, but not particularly quickly, and certainly not in line with the needs. And another thing which those of you who've been here and have been watching this space over recent months will see an increasing number of 50-50 commitments. So the notion that climate finance should be going 50% to adaptation alongside 50% into mitigation. And so that represents a big increase in the proportion of investments going into adaptation. In a sense, renewable energy investments are becoming a no-brainer these days because the renewable energy is cheap and there are growing energy demands. Making the case for adaptation investment, the case is there, but it's a trickier one, and without proper understanding of the scale of physical climate risks and how investment in adaptation reduces those risks and makes propositions more investable, that's essential in order to mobilize all of that finance. This is some figures from the Global Commission on Adaptation, again on adaptation finance, where it's going geographically. And then on the top picture, what's it going into? So interestingly, again, given that we've just heard about water, actually the greatest chunk of adaptation finance is going into water. And in many senses, people who, like me, who talk about adaptation, say that adaptation is a water problem. It's to do with too little water, too much water, inadequate water quality, water not existing when you need it. I would say, so then at the other end of the scale, there's 7% of that going into infrastructure. Of course, I would say that water is a category of infrastructure. So we might bundle those things together and say that by far the largest proportion of adaptation finance is going into infrastructure. And that, I think, is bound to be the case going forwards, because infrastructure is so important for adaptation. It provides essential services to society. Those the infrastructure assets are long-lived on the whole, so they're going to have to survive in a future climate which is very different to the one which we have at the moment. And they're often in vulnerable locations. They're in floodplains. They're on the coast. They're in places which they're likely to be hit by climate change. So if we are to bridge this adaptation finance gap, there needs to be much more credible project preparation in terms of the ways in which adaptation projects are brought forwards, because a lot of what the finance community is saying is that we'd like to be investing in adaptation, but we're not seeing the projects which are readily bankable, because they're not prepared in the right way. And quite a lot of that comes down to demonstrating the risk reduction benefit of adaptation, because that's where the financial case for adaptation comes from, is in quantifiably reducing climate risks. And we can use that climate risk information to prioritize where those adaptation investments ought to go. So what I'm going to come on to now is an analysis which my group does in the University of Oxford, which does exactly that, to quantify and map physical climate risk to infrastructure, identify options for climate risk management. That may be physical strengthening and maintenance. We're trying to look for as many opportunities as we can for nature-based solutions. It may be more at the systemic level. So how do we think about diversification in supply chains, for example? How do we think about backups? How do we think about the ways in which networks operate? And then there's a layer of financial protection in insurance, which layers on top of those physical protection mechanisms. The business case for all of those options then comes from how effective are they at reducing and managing risks. And by creating a ranked set of bankable propositions, one can then begin to translate that into a pipeline of forward infrastructure investments, which is what really unlocks the investment flows. So the spatial risk assessment, and we know that infrastructure is a very spatial thing. We need to know exactly where it is, how it's built, what standards is it designed to, how it's maintained, if we're going to analyze the climate risks to it. So the layers in our analysis go from climate hazards, so floods, droughts, hurricanes, heat waves, wildfires, landslides, all of those categories of climate-related hazards. We don't do that ourselves. There are many people in the University of Oxford who do, and we also use other hazard products from global providers. Our specialization is in infrastructure exposure. So not only where are the physical assets located, but also how are they connected to one another? So what are the networks which those assets are embedded in? Power transmission networks, pipe networks, transport networks, supply chains, which mean that when those assets fail, the impacts propagate far across those networks, way outside the hazard footprint where the hazard was hit, and away from the individual asset. So on the infrastructure as a means of creating systemic risks. And we're very interested in the potential scale of those systemic risks, because unless you value those systemic risks properly, you're not properly making the case for adaptation. And then going from that to say, well, let's look at a portfolio of adaptation options, drop them into our analysis and see how effective they might be at risk reduction in order to create those resilient investment pipelines. Just a few examples from that. This is analysis we did with the World Bank in Tanzania, looking at the transport network. First, looking at the scale of flood risk. So this is the percentage of regions in Tanzania at risk of flooding, and then the potential changes in that flood risk going forwards. Now looking, and I'm skipping through this quickly, I know time is short, at the national transport network, and you'll see that the thickness of those lines there illustrates the density of trade of freight flow down those networks. So one can pinpoint where you intersect the networks with the flood hazards, where is the greatest potential for disruption, so where should the adaptation be targeted. And now switching along the same story, but to another case in Vietnam, again with the World Bank. We're then looking at the economic losses per day of failure, Vietnam and then Brazil on the, sorry, Argentina. Gosh, I got that wrong for our Brazilian colleagues, Argentina. Where in these ones, in both of those pictures, you're looking at the economic loss per day from, on the right, landsliding, flooding, and storm failures in Vietnam. On the left, flooding failures in Argentina. So here we're saying we're attributing the amount of economic loss that would happen were those assets to fail, and then using that to make the case for better protection, better resilience of that in order to adapt them. And the types of adaptations we're looking at, as I say, are physical adaptations, also nature-based solutions like green slope stabilization. And one needs to then look at the trade-off, the cash flow problem of, on the top, we have the benefits. Those benefits are going up. Why are they going up? Because we expect this is relative to doing nothing, to not investing. We expect the climate risk to go up. So the benefits of adaptation are going to go up into the future. But of course, there are costs, not only the CapEx, but also recognizing that these types of adaptation depend upon continued OpEx. The costs are not cheap. So this we need to be kind of upfront about this, that building resilient infrastructure is not cheap infrastructure. So we need to prioritize very vigorously. And here, so we've done that discounted cash flow calculation and looked at the benefit cost ratios for every possible strengthening investment for every possible road in Vietnam. And the thickness of the black line there is what are the benefit cost ratios of investment in those assets. And we're looking at numbers greater than 1 are the investable ones. And in fact, on the right-hand side, we've ranked, and that's actually a log scale of benefit cost ratio. So the red line is 1. And you can see that from practically all of the assets in Vietnam, actually, you can't make a case for that level of resilience. But for some of them, the ones on the right-hand end, there's an incredibly strong economic case to invest in those assets and make them more resilient. So this is why prioritization, if we're going to use those billions of adaptation finance well, we have to go through this type of exercise. And the journey we're on now is upscaling that analysis. This again is with the World Bank to do it globally. So we have OpenStreetMap data for 60 million kilometers of roads on Earth. We have a version of practically every water and wastewater treatment asset. We have 1,400 ports on Earth. We have a global power plant data sets and networks for entire power plant networks. Some of it's synthetic. And so we can come up with these loss probability curves, value at risk for both direct damages and economic losses for literally, this is every road asset in Southeast Asia, and then aggregating across different regional jurisdictions. And the next stop is global. On Monday, there will be, in fact, it's been announced several times this week already, so I'm not breaking any confidentialities. The Global Resilience Index Initiative was announced by Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, by Achim Steiner, administrator from UNDP, by a whole bunch of other people, which takes this global analysis and applies it to look at risk to infrastructure assets around the world. We will be gradually implementing that over the coming year. So to conclude, this type of analysis will help to incentivize adaptation of investments. There's because of the movement for physical climate risk disclosure, there's a lot of work on disclosure at the moment, but frankly, a lot of what I'm seeing is not particularly accurate. It's based only on the exposure of assets to physical climate risk, and it doesn't properly look at their vulnerability, at the adaptation potential, and at those network effects. So we need to not only disclose, but also reduce uncertainties in disclosure if we're going to create the right types of incentives. And finally, those incentives will incentivize private adaptation action, but this is not just a private problem in the sense that I've talked about systemic risk to society and social needs for adaptation. And so alongside private adaptation to secure assets going into the future, we recognize that firms can discount excessively, that they're not sometimes valuing the future. And so there needs to be additional incentives and regulatory action to make sure that the full need for adaptation is embedded in investment decisions. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that very interesting insight. And interesting that you talk about adaptation as a water issue. Maybe we can touch upon that in the questions later. Next up is Samantha Pineda.
Not this one? Not this one. Do you have one there? But it's this. Can you send it to me quickly? Email? your computer here?
Okay, it looked like, are we back on? It looked like there was lots of technical issues there. So whilst we wait for that to correct, we can hear from the next speaker, which is João Paulo Ribeiro Santana.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As I came yesterday to show you how we're dealing with our environmental and social assets in Brazil, today I came to show you our future progress, future projects, especially those that are in progress and we are already putting them on the ground. So for those who weren't here yesterday and doesn't know where are our ports, I am João Paulo Ribeiro Santana. I am environmental director of the Porto de Paranaguá, and I'm going to show you where we are in south of Brazil. So here's Brazil, and in south of Brazil we've got the Paraná state. A bit far away from south of São Paulo, we've got the Bay of Paranaguá. In this area, we've got two ports that we manage. One of them is Antonina, and the other port is Paranaguá. And in our surroundings, we've got about 30, 35, and sometimes 40 communities. Those communities are traditional fishermen and as well indigenous people. So this is a perspective of our surrounding landscapes. And as you can see, we've got small cities around the bay, and as well as we've got a lot of rainforest. All of those rainforests, the rivers of them, they drain to inside of the Paranaguá Bay. And that carries a lot of sediments for inside the bay. And we spent a lot of money in dredging the channels for our navigation ships. So we have some projects for those ships and to keep them navigating, movementing our cargo, and to avoid to spend money and avoid as well the emissions of carbon fuels in the atmosphere, to avoiding the greenhouse effect by some projects that I'm going to show you now. So this is our movementation of cargo. Mainly, it's done by solid bulk cargo. And this solid bulk cargo is composed by grains as soya beans, corn, and they happen in this area. In orange, you can see our projects for the future expansion of the Porto. And these are the area of the movementation of the ships that we have to dredge in front of the port. So this is a perspective of growing that we are planning to do in the next few years. But how things happen today? Today, our movementation is mainly done by ships on the water, but the grains, they come to the port by train and as well as by lorries. So the lorries in our roads, they waste a lot of grains that fall on the ground, and the grains, they are carried inside the ships by the ship loaders that are those machines that you are seeing on the screen. But when the grains, they fall on the ground, we must swap them mechanically. And those are the small machines that are doing the swap. And today we send them, we send those grains to the garbage. And we are, of course, losing energy. So we have a small project to innovating with circular economy. And our project is, instead of send those grains to be buried, we would like to swap them and put them inside of a biogas plant. So we already have signed a compromise letter, and the company Sei Biogas, which is a company that was born inside the Itaipu binational company, they are experts in produce studies and develop projects to implant biogas plants. So that from that project, we are expecting to obtain three different products: electricity, biomethane, and as well as digestate. The digestate is a kind of sewage, and we can use that in agriculture. And in our surroundings of the bay, I'm going to show you later what are we planning to do with what we consider the agriculture of the future, which is done by agroforest systems. So those plants here of biogas, we don't know if it will be one or two or a small one that can grow in the future. We are depending now of a study. So it will be looking like something like that. So this is one of the biogestion plant that's working already in the Itaipu area, and then are developing for us a project. So how can we innovate with the community? The sewage that are coming, the digestate from the biogas plant, it can be used as fertilizer for natural succession of plants. So the agroforest systems, they are the agriculture of the future for us, because you don't do a monocultural plantation. You grow in layers, in different layers of plants. So you can have fruits, you can have wooden, you can have leaves, and as well as you can have the animals that come from that kind of technique. So it's a future technique for future, for where you can bring the community for the project. As well, you can bring the biodiversity, and of course you take carbon from the atmosphere. As well, we have signed a letter of intentions with the Itaipu Binationals as well, that has with the German agency GIZ an intention for implanting in Brazil a lot of different plants for green hydrogen. So this is one of the projects that we are waiting for start the studies. And here is one of the ideas that we brought in the last COP to show you how we are bringing to our communities from our surroundings the permacultural techniques. So permacultural has three different pillars, that is care for earth, care for people, and fair share. Those are the main pillars of the permaculture. So with that, we are taking classes of permacultural in our environmental classes with the community in our surroundings. Those pictures, they are from water source protections with handcrafted filters that can be done easily by anyone using charcoal and sand and some concrete pipes and a few tubes. With that, you can protect the water sources of the communities, and they can have water where there is no treatment systems for them to don't get diseases, and the children especially don't get sick. Here is a picture of one full agroforestry systems in its climax. And as well as before we implant the project, we have to show the community how it's going to be. So we have participation happening in the last 2 or 3 months that started to go with the community and speak with them, and we are showing them how it's going to be. And the ones that has areas that are today without forests, so it's the major areas, we are proposing them to implant agroforest systems. Of course, we are showing them how to do agriculture of the future, obtaining food for them, sequestering carbon from atmosphere, and avoiding the carriage of sediments from the rain to inside the bay. So we can avoid drainage, dredge in the future. And here are composting classes that we are doing in the islands with the communities in the islands, because today they took their rubbish and put inside plastic bags and they send by boat to the cities around. So we are trying to making them to see how they can produce food from the waste, so they can compost their garbage and using it for agriculture. And as well, we are showing some another projects for them. This is going to happen in the next few months. The company that's going to help us is already planning how to show and implement these classes for them. And mainly is how to treat sewage inside, how to build green, as what we call green buildings, and using natural lights, natural materials, because today they expend a lot of money bringing material to build their homes from the cities by boat in the island. So we are trying to propose them a different kind of human settlement. Those are the areas in our surroundings where we are proposing. The perspective of the landscapes are mainly like that. And for those communities as well, they are mainly fishermen, as I said before. We are building for them small piers, because we want them to change from their metrics of economy and stopping by being mailing fishermen and starting to receive tourists. So we are trying to help them to making more money and be in their homes with more efficiency and more money, and like that their children doesn't have to go to the cities for looking for jobs and leave their parents on the islands. So we already did 2 piers that are built in 2 islands, in 2 areas of 1 island, which is called Ilha do Mel Island in Paraná Bay. And here are our 2 ports that are surrounded by the communities that we are helping. As well, in south of Brazil, in our home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, João Paulo. Can we now hear from Vivian McKnight of Vail?
Yeah. Something's happening. But mine was in the desktop, I saw it. Yeah. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank to respond to climate change invitation to be here today to speak a little bit about how Vale is doing its mining activities in the north of Brazil inside the Carajás National Forest. Just a correction, when I was introduced, Vale is a mining company in Brazil, not in South Africa, just this quickly reminder. So here is just to share with you our operation presence in the region. So we are operating in that region for more than 35 years. And as my colleague presented earlier, it's a very rich part of the country with forests. So in this region, we operate several mines of iron ore, mines of copper. We also have a very huge, almost more than 9 100 kilometers of a railway that integrates the mining activities to the port, very nearby to the previous presentation port, also in Maranhão. And Vale has reinforced in late 2020 our manifesto about how to, what is our commitment regarding Amazon forest. It's necessary to act now and every day. And we are there helping to protect the forest for more than 30 years. And this manifesto has several indicators of how we plan and how we do to act in this region. I will just quote a few of them. So we made it very transparent that we are committed to respect and promote the rights of and culture of indigenous people and traditional communities. We'll also support the fight against illegal deforestation and illegal mining. And we also encourage the inclusion of forests in carbon markets through RED, for instance, and other several initiatives. This manifesto can be found in our website, where it's public, and we are very transparent in this regard. Very recently, I would like to reinforce the decision that we took this year to cede all titles to mining rights in areas that coincide with indigenous people lands. This is part of Vale's human rights policy and its broader company purpose, our company purpose, to improve life and transform the future together. And Vale has also a very bold climate change agenda. And of course, forest is part of it. Forest is very important as a part of climate change strategy within Vale. And forest conservation. Today, we already protect more than 1 million hectares of forests around the world. And we have just a target to protect 500,000 more. And this is part of our strategy. And we are working to recover 100,000 hectares through agroforestry arrangements, which were presented, for instance, yesterday at another session. And we are also committed to protect another 400,000 hectares. Here is just to show an example of what happened in the region where it operates. This green area is a protected area that we help to protect. It's around 800,000 hectares. And as you can see, following the timeline, what changed, the land use in the region changed a lot. And where we operate is this small orange parts of the graphic. It represents 3% of the entire green area. So this is something that's important, and it's very aligned with our ambitions to protect and conserve the forest as part of our climate change agenda. Here is just some numbers. I will not spend too much time here because of the time. And that is also something very important that we have been talking a lot in this COP about partnerships. Everybody talks, we cannot do this alone. We are doing our part. We are trying the best there, but we need to do it together. So this is a case that I would like to share with you about the Previsia, which is a platform that uses artificial intelligence to indicate areas at risk of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. Every Brazilian knows the size of the forest, and having this type of tool is a very good help for us to fight illegal deforestation. And this is a partnership with Amazon, Microsoft, and Radix and Vale. And this is it's something that's a clear example of what partnerships can bring as results when we act together for a common objective. Vale has also two additional investments in research and science and impact investing in the region. I would like to quote, for instance, the technology institute, Vale Technology Institute, which is an academic and research institution in the north of Brazil, in Belém, that it is our own, we have our own research infrastructure. We have a lot of researchers and scholarships. We have invested, we have a lot of scientific publications, and we are developing very interesting science studies there that I will show for you just in a couple of minutes in the next slides. Vale also has its Fundo Vale, or how we call it, Vale Fund, which is our impact investing mechanism. So this fund puts a lot of effort in helping communities, surrounding communities, in helping projects that aims to preserve the forest, aim to have sustainable use of the land. So we are partnering with them and trying to make the best of impact investing. And there are a lot of numbers that show how much we are working in the last years with these objectives. And here, as I told you, are some examples of what research can produce and how much it's important for Brazil, for instance. So the ITV is developing this study with a lot of partners, as you can see at the bottom of slides, which is mapping the genetic of the Amazon biome. It's important for biodiversity conservation, and it's important for having more data about the region. And this is another study. This is something that is being developed together with the Vale Fund, a project to generate income based on biodiversity. So here it's interesting. It's the picture over there. It's about a tree. So members there, population, they derive their primary livelihood from harvesting leaves from this tree, which is called jaborandi, a threatened species used to produce medicines for glaucoma and cancer, for instance. So this is another project that Vale is funding through its Vale Fund, impact investing mechanism for the company. So those are some examples that I would like to share with you. They are part of our strategy, part of making mining a sustainable activity, and focusing on the land use, because mining, of course, it's very impact in terms of land use, but there's also opportunity to protect the forest, and the partnership is very important for us to get there. There is a small video here, but I'm not sure if we have time. Do we have time? I will insert the link in the comments after. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you very much for that. I think that we're going to try one more time with Samantha Pineda. So, Samantha.
Okay. Firstly, I would like to thank South Africa government, NBI and RTCC for having me. Thank you, Nicole. I'm Samantha Pineda, a lawyer specializing in environmental law for over 20 years. It does not seem, I hope. I'm Director Council member of Wiki Brazil, Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and now we are BRICS too, BRICS Women. I am a founding partner of a specialized office, Pineda Ikran, which works only in the environmental area in causes throughout Brazil. In your job, we have worked in the National Congress as legal consultants for the preparation of most of the environmental legislation in Brazil, since 2006, with emphasis on the forest code. It's like my son, which I worked intensively on for over 6 years until its approval. Next, please. It's like a congressman party in National Congress when the Forest Code was approved. We also support legislation and regulations on the recent national policy on payment for environmental services law, approved earlier this year. And we also cope with the states and municipalities updates on the subject. Again, this is my happy face with the approval of National Code for Forest. In addition, we have been following the regulatory environment evolution with the purpose of including sustainability within process and activities and added value to final products. This is important to Brazil. Next, please. Before going any further, I would like to talk to you about the environmental issues in Brazil. It's the reality. Everyone is concerned about illegal deforestation in the Amazon. It's real, and carried out by criminals. It's not companies, industries, it's not agribusiness, it's a activity, criminal activity. Timber smuggling, again, animal trafficking, illegal mining, lands grabbing, and the reasons beside the obvious large size of the region. It's too large. The lack of land tenure, regularization, and alternative based on bioeconomy. You don't have another chance, the bioeconomy. At this conference, Brazil compromised itself to end illegal deforestation. And this issue also the main reason to justify investments, as strange as it may seem, but let's see why. This panel, Investing for Social and Provide Environmental Impact, requires some initial considerations. Please, again. Sustainability is a reversible concept. Since the 2019 Davos Economic Forum, the concepts of ecologically correct, socially fair, and economically viable have been part of any investor risks analysis. Brazil became a great opportunity in times of ESG because it was born sustainable. Its first environmental legislation dates back to 1600 and 1700s, when we were still a colony of Portugal. Next slide, please. We have the strict, yes, this is our country. This is our green country. We have the strict environmental laws on the planet. Yes, I have sure about this. Large extenses of conserved areas, we feed more than about, and suppose this, we feed more than 1 billion people with our carbon-based production, which is carried out, it's only 8% of the territory. reflecting our great photosynthetic productive potential. In this carbon moment, it's so important. Brazilian rural production is absolutely sustainable. There are two main legal obligations for any producer: permanent preservation areas and legal reserves. Next, please. Permanent preservation areas are environmentally relevant places such as riverbanks, around springs, slopes, and hilltops that are protected regardless of their location. And these areas mainly serve to save water and soil resources, in addition to severing a corridor for fauna. Our protected areas, our green areas, it's like this 48 countries and territories of the Europe. It's so important and so big. Please, next. The other obligation refers to so-called legal reserve, requiring landholders to maintain on their property a percentage of native vegetation that varies according location and ranges from 20 to 80%. Similar to a trust land that you know. Yes, some rural properties can only produce 20%, and yes, this is a private obligation. Besides that, in areas subject to production, we have and you use tropical agriculture, innovation, and technology developed by institutions such as Embrapa, Exalc, IAC, among others, which are highly conservationist by applying integrated production system like ILPF, agriculture, pasture, and forestry, non-tillage, soil nitrogen fixation, crop rotation, and others. Like here we have some examples. That result in the recovery of degraded areas, animal welfare, carbon sequestration, lower methane emissions, and how we have another compromise with this, and high productivity. It's fair because sustainable is a value now. Our energy matrix is clean. It's based on hydroelectric power and biofuels. That side, next please. We need to understand the main challenges for enabling private capital to finance sustainable infrastructure. I understand that in principle, issues are related to lack of legal certainty and adequate instruments for investors to hold process transparency. For credit to grave, no. At Pineda Icrã, our firm, we are 5 partners, and they are watching me now. So Manuela Icrã, Luisa Furiati, Manuela Andrade, Maria Fernanda, welcome to the COP26. You are all women, so gender agenda is in our DNA. We have had successful experiences for investment allocation because knowing the law and process, and we find viable solutions for financial return and risk reduction. We have more than 700 ongoing litigation process and more than 300 consultancies involving millions of hectares and billions of dollars in negotiations, and legal producers involving local, subnational, and national environmental agencies, which allow us to provide the necessary security and celerity that any good business requires. As an example of problem solving, the next please. We have a client a 10,000 hectare farm in the state of Rio de Janeiro, in your honor. Municipality of Paraty, where there was a conflict with traditional and indigenous communities. And we create a working group with the state government, state attorney, land institute, environmental agency, city hall, representatives of local and indigenous communities to give swift and fair resolution to all involved. In this location, the intention, this beautiful location, the intention is to build an ecological resort, marina school, and condominium, respecting the local culture and vegetation, increasing the tourist infrastructure, and yes, more chances for people. In a place that is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a new unique blend of historic and natural riches. This is an example for how our possibility to quickly, fairly, and therefore less costly resolve conflicts and obstacles to investment sustainable infrastructure. Our experience proved that is possible. Please, the next. To promote solutions that are, this is Paraty, it's so beautiful. Next, please. It's possible to promote solutions that are the best for environment, society, and economy. Society, sorry. It's my meeting room there in Paraty. As Aristotle used it to say, virtus in medium est. Since the national policy on payment for environmental services was implemented earlier this year, business has heated up in Brazil. At this moment, it's extremely opportune for green investments. We already have more than 20 projects underway involving approximately 5 million hectares, which correspond to something like 2.5 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. In addition to protecting important ecosystems, native species, and water. We periodically study comparative legislation for more than 20 countries, both for updates and evaluating opportunities. Although Brazil is best known for its problems, the solutions and opportunities are infinitely greater and produce better results. Brazilian legislation have evolved from a model of repression, command and control, to norms for encouraging and rewarding sustainable behavior. This is we, Pineda Ikran, expertise is mostly valuable. And the next, please. We believe that we are Brazil is part of the solution, because we are a true industry of capture the carbon and another environmental services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all our speakers. Bar the technical difficulties, I think that we got there in the end and had some interesting discussions. We don't have time for any questions, unfortunately. But thank you again to the speakers and to the South Africa Pavilion and the National Business Initiative. Thank you.